Welcome to Adeptus On-Air, the show where we examine how individuals and companies make decisions that drive their business and personal success. Each week, we connect with notable professionals who pull back the curtain on the industries that Adeptus has been on the cutting edge of for the last 30 years, including music, sports, and entertainment, as well as new emerging markets.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Adeptus On-Air. I'm your host for today, Evan Eneman, and we are here with Amber Setter, the founder and chief consciousness officer of Conscious Public Accountants. Amber, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Excited to connect.
Yes, well, thank you for being here. There's going to be a lot of different things to talk about, but I think a great place to start for our audience is to give a little bit of background. If you can share your time in your professional role and then your transition into what you do now as a professional coach.
Yeah. So I've been in pretty much working directly in public accounting firms or consulting to them for 20 years. I started as an accountant, so did my undergraduate in accounting, and it only took me a couple busy seasons to realize I could do that, but my just inherent skill set was in the development of people. So I've primarily just been in the people side of the business. I worked in campus recruiting, really a lot of career advisement there, helping people understand where they want to work and what's the right size organization for them. Because I had an internship in Big Four and thought, that's not where I want to start full time. I chose to work at a smaller firm, which was a great play for me. Went back to school and did a master's in leadership. When I came back from that experience, back on to full time, I then took on being the learning and development manager in a firm. And then I had this wild idea to do the CPA exam 7 years later because I'm a little bit of an activist. So if I want to change something, I want a seat at the table, and to have a seat at the table in the profession, I needed that designation. That was a grueling experience and really burned me out big time. And I thought, well, what am I doing with my life? What do I really want to do? And that got me into coach training. So I've been coaching for 10 years now. I did a little bit at the firm I was at before I left. I was on my own for 3 years. Then I was recruited by PwC. I was a coach for them, which was an amazing experience just to see all the different ways they deployed coaching, and been back on my own and now have a team of other contract coaches, which is a lovely way to just both have a broader impact in the profession. But I'm a trainer and a mentor and a coach by heart. So now I get to do that with a team of up and coming coaches as well.
Well, that's really exciting. The people side of the business is probably the most difficult part to manage and to help coach and guide people. And we share an alma mater at PwC in many ways. And so we know that large Big Four environment and what that is and can do to the people that work there. Why don't you talk a little bit about what that transition is like from a practitioner to a coach? You obviously understand inherently, you mentioned burnout from taking the CPA exam 7 years later. That weighs on people very heavily when they come out of whatever accounting program they are, their first couple of years in the profession. How do you work with young professionals? And then we'll get into the executive ranks, young professionals and knowing how to manage themselves in that environment and, making sure they don't burn out while going through that rigorous certification process.
Yeah, well, it's a tough one, to be honest. Like if you see a little hesitation and reservation in my voice, it is really challenging for people to go from the college environment to being a full-time employee. And I think that's true for people that, even worked while they were in college and did different things and juggled a lot of responsibilities. When you're suddenly plopped inside of an accounting firm, even if it's a smaller firm, there's a lot of things that you don't learn in other environments. And I think one of the greatest pulls is the matrix reporting environment. So, you're reporting to multiple different managers as a young person who all have a different working style, who aren't all directly supervising you or mentoring you. And I think that's a huge, huge challenge. In fact, it's something I've been, the firms that I work with, just inviting them to consider, does that even work anymore? Given people are distributed and you don't see them, they're not in the office. You don't see if their wheels are turning, if they're working 12-hour days. Like, maybe we need to get away from that model. But for those individuals, they just come in bright eyed, bushy tailed, usually people who work in a professional, environment, whether they chose law or accounting or finance, tend to just by their nature be go getter and ambitious. And so when you're in an environment that will continue to take all that ambition and rewards all that ambition and good work with more work until all of a sudden you're like, I'm exhausted. What am I doing with my life? It can be quite challenging, to be honest. And that's why one of the things that our firm does that I love is offers CPA exam coaching. Yes, it helps people with the license and the designation, which is awesome, but I really call it the Trojan horse of personal development, because that's when we get to teach them things like how to manage healthy boundaries. They don't teach that in business school. They don't teach you how to manage your anxiety. And we teach those things that help people in their pursuit of achieving their goals and dreams, but also not sacrificing their health and wellness along the way.
But certainly sacrificing your health and wellness and adding additional stress and going through the rigor of a certification and then putting in your 10 years to become a partner is worth it, because now you're a partner of a CPA firm, right? So everything's now great. You have all your free time again. You can tell everyone what to do. Isn't that the career path that people want?
I think that used to be true. I mean, I think that used to be true when by the time you got to partner, then that meant you got to slow down and catch your breath and that you had more spaciousness. Um, and I don't think it's that way anymore. What we're seeing now is partners are busier than they've ever been. And what I've been encouraging people to do in organizational life is to really be mindful of what I've termed your loyal layer. So your loyal layer are right now about to make partner, or they're your younger partners. And those are the individuals that's like physically sat in the organization pre-COVID, and they were, they grew up and they understand your culture. They're very loyal to the clients. They're very loyal to you. There's this deep camaraderie that was built over that time. And now they're exhausted, right? They have all these staff that have turned over. They have just regulations change after regulations, and they're pretty exhausted. And they might already be partner going, what am I doing with my life? Like, I'm exhausted and I'm tired, and I finally got a seat at the table. And now that I'm seeing what happens at the table, I'm a little disillusioned and disappointed, and they're questioning what they're doing.
So is that indicative of the profession, or is it also, something you mentioned, we don't teach people how to manage stress or anxiety in business school or in school in general. We don't teach people how to understand what their feelings mean and how to respond to that in a professional workplace. So a lot of these things that layer and layer cause these emotional reactions to things that may not necessarily have to be too emotional. Is it, a combination of things that cause younger, people that have this loyalty layer, or partners and executives of firms? Is there something that you're doing now in what you're doing with coaching, or that needs to change systematically so that we don't have that transition from, this, I love what I'm doing, I love the people, but I'm burning out so fast and now I don't know what I'm doing with my life? Because that's that existential crisis that you can have when you're 21, you can have when you're 40, you can have when you're 60.
Yeah.
Is there something that can help address that?
That's $1 million question. I mean, I think there's a couple things. I think there's things that are related to professional service firms that are like bygone era stuff. And then I think there's just the sign of modern times. There was something I saw on Instagram and it was like, it said something like, sorry for my delayed response. I got 37 texts, 200 emails, and I have a brain that was designed to like sit in a cave and eat berries. And I think there's like some truth to that, right? We're like so barraged with information all the time, and it's hard to catch up. And that is not particular to any industry. It's just a modern day reality. And so, what we thought would be lovely, we'd be liberated to have our email on our phone or to be able to take our laptop to the beach, is actually more like a ball and chain. And we haven't learned how to harness that technology and how to actually take these periods off to just rest and decompress, and how valuable that is. So there's some of it that is just, modern day life that's challenging. But then there's also, well, what is it working in a professional service firm, and what doesn't work anymore? I've long been criticizing the billable hour, which is this idea that we're just going to measure people by the number of hours that they put in. And I wrote an article, it's probably like 10 years ago, for the Journal of Accountancy Online about how, retiring the billable hour as a measure of performance. And it sticks out to me because of how many people wrote me to have me reconsider my position that we should actually keep the billable hour. Like, they were just really fierce about it. I've never got so much fan mail or, skeptical mail, so to speak. And my response is, I always say, you have to think about, imagine you have two staff accountants, and one is like my Monday night ritual. Monday nights, I work, I go to yoga, I come home and have a healthy dinner, and I get a great night's sleep. And so usually Tuesdays is like such a productive, amazing day for me. But there used to be days when I was a staff accountant where maybe I went to happy hour that turned into a late dinner, that the next thing I know, we're out drinking on a Thursday. And the next day, my 8 hours are wildly different than my Tuesday 8 hours. And to believe that you can measure, somebody's life force energy or their intellectual output by just an arbitrary number is kind of silly. And it's not just a way that makes it, I don't know, almost comical of how people build their practices on and what they believe that they're, really like, oh, but these numbers are telling me something. It's what happens to the psychology of the human worker, where it's like, how it feels that they have to enter their time. How it feels for them, where it's like, I have to get in my 55 billable hours during busy season. It doesn't matter if I'm sick or I've got a family member who, needs me to come help them. None of that matters. I just have to hit those hours or I'm in trouble. And there's a lot of wasted energy on anxiety around all of that stuff that would be much more productive if someone could, instead of stress out about monitoring their hours, they could just be getting the work done.
Well, that's a whole multi-page white paper on how to fix that issue, and it's not just accounting. So
It's
we'll leave that for a separate conversation. But what you bring up in there is a great point. That this idea of burnout not just being a reflection of the work you're doing, but also this recollection of how much work you were doing when you may have been sick, or to your point, you may need to help a family member, go see someone for something. So the burnout that someone feels isn't just the work. That at times is manageable, right? You have too much work to do. All right, well, I just have to prioritize better or manage my week, workload better. There are tools to address that, but the then recounting of that over and over again, and then someone asking you to submit your hours because we have to bill our client, all these different things that go into the process of managing a client, billing the client, and the team that has to address that adds to that level of burnout, because that's that psychological, that emotional response. Can you talk a little bit about those signs of burnout and how do we avoid burnout, especially at this time of year? I mean, we have holidays and family, which family is always a trigger, and holidays are very often a trigger for people in their personal lives, but also it's a year-end close. We have to get things done on December 31st before the new year, and that whole cycle. So can you speak about that in the context of burnout, how we can identify those signs of burnout, and then the tools that maybe you can advise our audience on, even if it's one, to start to look at things a little bit differently in their lives?
Yeah, I can definitely get into that, but I also want to add one more bit about, I think, burnout and what happens this time of year. So there's absolutely like year-end planning, and there is definitely what goes on with family. But there's also the, like, we've heard of what the Sunday scaries are. People are like, oh, I gotta return to work tomorrow. Well, now people are like looking down the barrel of busy season, whether you're working, like, I got to do the 1099s, or I'm in tax, or I'm in audit. You're like, ugh, like it's Sunday scaries, like times a million. And I have some lovely clients that I've worked with like multiple years, and I'm like, just distinctly remember people will show up like the third week of January and all kinds of feelings. And I'm just like, wait, stop. Do you really need to be stressed out right now? Or it's just like Pavlov's theory. Like, I look at the clock and I just need to, like, oh my God, I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
start drooling. Like, but like they start freaking out. And that freaking out in ways is well designed because it gets them into like overdrive. But if you think about human performance, right, or athletic performance, I used to run marathons, like, and don't ask me why, but you don't keep running 20 milers every single day. Like, you do a 20 miler and then you eat a bunch of fuel and then you rest and recover. And so that is a way that you can really have some tools of thinking about, I'm going to expend my energy, but how do I source myself along the way? So you also asked, well, what are some questions, like what are some tells? How would I know if I'm burned out? One is, you can actually write down and pattern out. It's an exercise I do with people of like, what is my pattern of burnout? Like, how do I know when I'm starting to burn out? What does that look like? So you just start off, like, pick a moment in time where you felt overwhelmed. Okay. What happened before that? What were some of these conditions that created that? And then what's predictable? Where do you go from here? There's usually a lot of emotion that shows up, right? So people start to feel frustrated. They start to get angry. Maybe they get, they pull back, they get resigned at a certain point, they just get fed up. I think if people are coming to you to express a frustration or a concern, it's really important to actually listen and validate it and get curious, instead of saying, well, it's not that bad, or, there's other firms that really don't have enough staff either. It's like, well, okay, like, thanks for telling me. What do you think we need to do? Like, just get curious and lead differently. Um, but I think that back to the tools, it's also just really starting to think of yourself. There's a book called The Corporate Athlete. You don't even have to read it. Just start thinking in that way of like, how my intellect is a source of energy, and what do I need to do to take care of this as a knowledge worker? I need to take breaks. I need to get out in the world. It's lovely to work from home. I've worked from home since 2005. And at first I was like, this is great. I could be in my pajamas. And I'm like, oh my God, it's 3 o'clock. I'm in my pajamas. Like, how do you need to create rhythms in life? You can get connected with the people you work with, get out of the house and have lunch with other humans. I used to say I could only talk to my dog so much. And build structure and rhythm in your life. That's, I think, just like you have a deadline and a way that you go about getting a project done or an engagement completed. Take a huge step back and go, how am I going to get through these next 4 months? And how do I build this in a sustainable way? And not just making, I'm going to go for a walk by myself. Guess what? You're probably going to cancel that. But if you made plans to walk with a neighbor, you probably won't flake out on your neighbor. So building accountability can really help you too.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I always talk to my dog, and she's the best listener around. So it's great. Sometimes that sounding board isn't, you don't need the response. You just need to get it out and share it. And it looks less crazy when you're talking to a tree than when you're talking to a dog. I mean, the dog just can respond to it, although the trees work really well too.
Yeah.
Um, we used to make fun of my father growing up because he would always go outside for his piece and go talk to the plants and talk to the trees and have his conversations. And it's just one of those tools just to clear your head, like get something off your chest that you've been sitting with. And whether you're dealing with an anxiety or not, sometimes you don't even know that. You mentioned that the date on the calendar hits, and all of a sudden we're supposed to feel anxiety and stress. So we programmed ourselves for that. And not just
Mhm.
we've programmed ourselves, others have programmed people in certain situations to act or react to that stress at that time of year. And you're right. Hearing that someone else has it worse off isn't always um, the best thing to hear, and sometimes it almost makes us feel worse because we don't want someone else to be worse off either.
Yeah.
So that might add anxiety to someone and stress to someone when your HR manager or your internal mentor says, "Yeah, well, so and so firm has it worse off. They have no staff accountants this year, and we at least have two." And that's not a great feeling either. So if if burnout or this identification of burnout is something that we can model ourselves, you brought up a word that I want to talk a little bit about, which is this accountability. And it's a difficult word to accept sometimes. Um, it it just brings a lot of things together where there are all these sayings. The buck stops here. Other less kind ways of saying that. What does accountability mean to you in helping someone understand the decisions they're making, the boundaries that they have to create, especially in the context of their workplace or their employer relationship, but also in their personal life to make those decisions that they need to make for what's best for them?
Yeah, it's a great question. One of the first things that came up for me as you're asking it is like, well, how do I define accountability, right? Or what does it look like in my own life? And I talk about this a lot when I talk about mental health and just my experience as a human. Is I came from a family background that was pretty disruptive and unhealthy, right? My dad is 81. He's still an alcoholic. I have huge empathy for him, but it was difficult having that as a father. And my mom has mental health issues. And I got to this place where sort of spiritually, I thought, what if I chose them as my parents? If I took ultimate responsibility that my soul looked down, I'm like, wow, these two people, they're going to teach you a lot about life. And they did, right? Like I made I chose accounting because I thought it would be a great career path, well laid out, respected in the world, demonstrated I was smart, I was a professional, could make good money, like, and it really has served. It's been a wonderful choice. But that shift in my mindset of I am ultimately responsible for everything that's going on. And I'm making choices, right? So a recent choice that I made was to volunteer for something. And I thought, oh, they'll be great. I could be helpful to them. And I get into this volunteer role and it's taking way more time than I imagined. And it's taking time away from my family. It's taking time away from my business. It's taking time away from future endeavors. I'm responsible for that, not that system. I made the choice to volunteer. I made the choice. I did ask, how many hours do you think it is a week? Turns out that estimate was wrong, but now I'm at choice on how I respond. So I think accountability is really like, how do I continue to always hold myself responsible for my choices? Um, in organizational life, sometimes I don't think that people see it that way, right? Like there's a lot of, well, the organization wants this and they say I have to be that. And it is a relationship. We're always in relationship, right? Like I'm in a relationship with my partner, and sometimes it's uncomfortable to live with another human being. But that's a choice. I want to be committed. I want to learn and grow. And we get to do the same thing in all relationships in life. And ultimately, be accountable for our choice and be empowered in our choice. So maybe it's a little more esoteric and spiritual, because I think that a lot of times people are more rigor. And even when I first started coaching, like a big part of coaching is helping people stay accountable for the change they desire. And it's like, okay, well, what are you going to do and by when? I'm going to hold you accountable. I'm going to hold you accountable. But the real juiciest work comes from noticing, why am I taking action or not? And that's where the real learning and growth is. And, yes, you want to have rigor with accountability, but you also want to go, well, but is this the right choice for me anymore? And do I need to reroute?
It sounds like accountability is a path for growth. So accepting those choices, good or bad, and maybe not even defining it as bad, just as a challenge that you have to then overcome because you made a decision that may not have been the best at that point in time with the information you had. And that's all a decision is, right? It's the best we can do at a point in time with the information available to us or the resources we have available to us. And so accountability, it sounds like, just means to say that understanding the action that we took, the choice that we took or I took, and owning that. And if it's good, maybe you continue it. If it's not as good, thinking about how to modify that and change it while still being responsible for that decision and not trying to say, well, someone else did something. Because in that moment, you're giving up your own control. And we're not going to have a conversation around free will and whether we have it or not. That's a whole other, again, long conversation that others that are far more intelligent than I have had. But we're basically saying we have agency over ourselves, and I'm accountable for my actions and my reactions to things. And that's a chance for us to grow, which is not comfortable for a lot of people. When you're
No.
put in that position, that's when that inner turmoil, that angst starts to come up. It's like, well, I don't want to be responsible for this, and I don't know how to handle that. And so, is there anything that you can give from your experience or in coaching others where I may want to take responsibility and be accountable for something, but it also is not something I'm used to doing. I'm used to passing it off to some. Well, my associate didn't get this done in time, right? That's an easy one. But I'm the manager. I'm the one that's supposed to review it and get it done within a certain period of time. So I'm trying to pass that off. What's that guidance you can give someone who's in that moment, who is maybe scared for their job? If they take responsibility, they may lose their job, or someone that's just not comfortable with dealing with that change and being responsible for something that may impact others.
Yeah, there's a lot of multi layers in that question, but I was thinking about when you're first asking this, how I've changed sort of my automatic response when I delegate. So, I'll be very honest. When I would delegate something and it didn't come back the way that I expected, my automatic was like, they got this wrong. You know what I mean? Like they did it wrong. And what I'm learning and what I've reprogrammed myself, like change that automatic, because I can hear it. What are they doing wrong? And now I realize, like, okay, I've got an automatic response. How do I put in something more empowering where it's automatically, what did I do wrong when I delegated this? What information did I not provide? Where was I confusing? Where did I give them the absolute wrong information? Because I did that once. Like I gave someone the totally wrong dates, and that's where they were wrong on my calendar because I gave the wrong information, right? It was me. And it is such a It's humbling, I guess that's the first word, right? Like it's so humbling to change that, but it's so powerful because you realize like, oh, what if I'm ultimately responsible for these things that aren't really working for me? There was something that you mentioned about where people, this fear of, what if I lose my job? And there's this really beautiful passage out of a book. And I say that like it's a spiritual book, it's a business book, but I think it's a beautiful passage. It's called, I don't know if it's Mastering Leadership. I'm like, if you see me straining over here, I'm looking on my bookshelf. It's either in Mastering Leadership or Scaling Leadership, that is written by Bob Anderson, who does the Leadership Circle profile. It's a 360 I use to measure leadership effectiveness. And it helps people just say, well, what do I want to do in coaching? Where am I going to get the greatest ROI? But they talk about how each of us manages an internal tension between safety and purpose. So safety is, I've got bills to pay, like I need to keep my lights on and a roof over my head or feed my kids or whatever it is. And as we get older, that need for safety, it gets bigger. You would think we'd feel like safer because we've been here, but usually we have more responsibility, or we're earning more, or we've climbed the ladder, so the fall looks even greater. And then purpose is like, well, what would I do if I could do anything? If I knew that I could do anything in this organization and I wasn't going to get fired, or I wasn't going to be seen as a failure, what would I do? And those two things, we feel at times are at pulling at opposites, but that's actually the beauty of coaching. And I'd say specifically when I'm in coaching engagements where we're doing it in the system, like people, their, other stakeholders, their bosses are involved, because the coachee has to start saying these things. Well, this is what I'd really love to do. And most often the organization's like, sounds good. Like we need that change. You would be great at that. But that's the magic, right? You can have both. I think we just live in this era with, all those texts and voicemails and all that stuff where we're not stopping and going, what is my purpose? What do I actually want to do? And I'm not going to get fired for it when I'm doing like what I'm meant to do. I'm going to just be insanely valuable to the world.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic that we have to live through and learn very quickly how to adapt to that. And you shared a little bit before about your upbringing, your parents, and some of the challenges that those presented, and the lessons learned from that. Can you kind of step back to late 2019, early 2020, some of the decisions that you were making pre-pandemic that um, maybe coming out of the pandemic helped you to realize that there are different ways of doing things in your life, personally, that you have now brought to your coaching and brought to your professional work with others?
Yeah, I do. But the first thing I want to do is actually kind of normalize a little bit about my experience, because what I don't think people in modern America realize is the amount of trauma that is going on. And so I used to believe that PTSD was like only happened to military officers, right? Post traumatic stress disorder. But there's something called complex post traumatic stress disorder, which is about when a child grows up, maybe they had a disruptive childhood or they were neglected. And there's a book called The Body Keeps the Score that says that 1 in 4 children, like 1 in 4 adults are alcoholics, right? So 1 in 4 people might have had a childhood like mine. 1 in 3 couples engage in domestic violence, and 1 out of 5 children were molested. And so, yeah, Amber Sutter had this upbringing, but statistically, so did a lot of people in America that are working in your organizations, and they're maybe not even conscious that these things happen to them, or if they are, they don't really realize how they're still impacting them in the workplace. And so that to me is another like sweet spot in coaching, is to help people overcome that stuff. And all those things, I've heard of domestic violence, I've heard of, people being abused, I've heard of sexual assault, I hear of all of this in coaching. They are not just things that you can talk to a therapist about, you can explore them in coaching. So I'll talk to you about my life, but I also just wanted any listeners to know that they might not be alone in their journey, and or if somebody in the workplace yells at somebody, or they're acting, there's an outburst emotionally that you don't understand, they just might have had something in their life that's lingering and hasn't been processed. So for me personally, I feel like, it was a blessing that I kind of had what they say, a midlife crisis pre-pandemic. I was recently divorced, and while it was definitely the right choice for us to move on in the relationship, the really hard part about that for me was shifting to only having my daughter 50% custody. Because in my upbringing, my mom wasn't around in my life. So I had a big mother wound. And here I am, like, only going to see my daughter 50%. And that was a really hard pill to swallow. Um, I had worked in a couple of corporate environments that were really unhealthy, and I was not not congruent with who I am as a person. I had behaviors that I exhibited that weren't okay for my own code of ethics. And then I was simultaneously all of a sudden trying to date, and that was an absolute disaster because I come from such a dysfunctional environment growing up as a kid. Like, I didn't know how to do healthy relationship. And so all of these things were going on, and I was feeling very unsettled and, very kind of off my center. And simultaneously, a friend of mine who had been a Navy SEAL came, and he said, hey, I just had this profound weekend in Mexico. I went down there to be treated for my PTSD, and what we're doing down there is psychedelics. And it was life changing. One weekend was life changing. And Amber, you're a coach. Like, you have to coach people. This is profound, but we have an amazing weekend and we need something after. So I hear that. I'm like, oh, I'm interested. And I start talking to all the people that are in that psychedelic world, that, doctors of studies that are now probably going through the FDA, the therapist that the nonprofit had hired, and the resounding response to, well, if you want to coach people that are doing this, you have to sit with medicine. And that's when I began my own journey of trying psychedelics out, because there I was in my midlife crisis, and I had done everything before. Like, I've done therapy, I've hired coaches, I've been to the Landmark Forum, I've been practicing yoga since, like, when I started public accounting after my first busy season spit me out. I've done like everything I could grow as a human, and still was like feeling like I'm not winning at this game of life, and I'm willing to try something else. So that was amazing. That's, I think, was I'm very grateful I did it pre-pandemic, because the pandemic wasn't that rough for me. I kind of really worked through a lot of stuff in a short amount of time, that, I was not worried about a virus after I felt like I met God in in a psychedelic ceremony. So
So that experience is one that you came to from someone else giving you some feedback on something that was profound for them. And obviously, not all medicines are for everyone. So there is definitely a need for a measured and balanced approach, guidance from those that you can trust and have a conversation with and be vulnerable with, given the challenges that you may or may not be facing and you want to address. Um, how does that experience now inform the work you do as a coach, and how you share these experiences with your clients or with the general audience. I mean, the people that are listening to this podcast right now, these are people that may be struggling with many of the same things. I mean, 1 in 4, 1 in 3, 1 in 5. Those are really high percentages of people that are struggling with something. So I think, a lot of times you say everyone's been impacted by someone who suffers with a mental health issue or mental illness or something in those, areas, or alcoholism or drug abuse, whatever it may be. And that's real. If 1 in 4, 1 in 3, or 1 in 5, that's, at least in this country, everyone is impacted by it. If not directly, which is unlikely, indirectly, which is either immediate family or right outside of that immediate family group.
Yep.
So how do you take all of that? How do you understand plant medicine now through your experience, and how do you incorporate that into your work as a professional coach?
Yeah. So in coaching, one of the things that I was trained on is really a couple things. How do you meet the client where they're at, right? So some people come in and have done a lot of inner work. And maybe some people, this is all brand new. Maybe they've never gone to a therapist. They don't know how to name their feelings. And so there's no right or wrong. It's just like, where is the client at? And what is their appetite for jumping in and changing their life? And I really believe that psychedelics is like the most efficient and effective inner work you can do. Like, it just gets down to things so much faster than a therapeutic or a coaching approach, and I think they works beautifully with it. I don't think it's like necessarily just going and scoring some stuff on your own and going out there. I think it actually is really served in the container with a supportive structure. But back to how I have it in my coaching practice, I don't talk to every client about it. It's not necessarily for everyone. It just depends on where someone's at in their journey. And I think I'm probably extra judicious because I am such a fan, and I don't want to project my enthusiasm into a space where it doesn't belong, because that's me just talking about what I want to talk about. And that's really not what coaching is, right? So when I coach someone, it's like, Evan, what do you want to talk about today? What's most important for you? And if somehow on that journey, it's like, this might be one tool that could help you, then maybe I might talk about it more. Um, at the same time, though, I want to change that up a little bit, to be honest. So I've been seeking, really studying, not just from having my own plant medicine experiences and watching Netflix movies and reading books, but actually training with other practitioners and learning more about it, and then specifically offering psychedelic integration coaching. So that if somebody is like, hey, I want to do this, but I want to do this in a way that's informed, that I'm choosing the right medicine, that I'm choosing the right practitioner to do it with, that I can really help guide them in a way that feels very responsible. Because I take my profession serious, right? There's a lot of people that call themselves coaches, and maybe they've done a real coach training and they haven't. And I take my practice seriously. Like, I'm certified by the International Coach Federation. So much like accounting, we have a code of ethics. My work has been supervised and evaluated. Like, there's some pretty strong rigor to it. And I think especially with plant medicine, because it's I call it 10 years of therapy in one night. Andre 3000 just released his flute album, and he said the shaman told him it was 20 years of therapy in one night. But it's real, and it needs to have, I would say, extra safety precaution in it because of how powerful it is for people.
When you experience that, and it's an interesting conversation to have because of the decades of stigmatization around different plant medicines. And I've worked in cannabis for a very long time, was part of the early conversation to destigmatize its use. And And, some of these professions have these um, proclamations or obligations, if you will. For example, a physician, the first call is to do no harm. Well, that can be you don't actively do harm, but you can passively cause harm. And so there's this really interesting time where we're sort of living through with this resurgence of a real conversation around plant medicine. Not to say that before then it was not. There was a lot of science going into this leading up into the 50s and 60s before essentially all qualified plant medicine was then banned and determined to be illegal, a controlled substance on either Schedule 1 or Schedule 2. So, part of the dynamic for understanding different tools, whether it be a therapist who's there to help you and coach you through challenges you have in your life, childhood trauma, others, the decade, 2 decades worth of therapy that we're going to pay for and try and get help with, to understanding that there is a lot of science. There's even a lot more anecdotal evidence over thousands of years of use, but there's a lot of science now to address how these tools can help people actually be vulnerable, which is the first space to be able to change things that have not been ideal in their lives. So that's a really important conversation happening right now. What is legal? What's not legal? Where can I try this? Where can I not try this? And obviously, there aren't a lot of places where these substances are legal. I know these are topics that we can go into further depth on, and not to talk about the legality of that in this conversation. But if I'm a professional and I'm thinking about where I am in my life, and I want to start to grow, and I'm at this ceiling, if you will, whether I work in a toxic workplace, and that is very traumatic, consistently traumatic for a lot of people, and that's a great example of these complex traumas that we don't normally associate with it. Obviously, on a battlefield, it's pretty clear. When you're in an office space, that's not as clear to what that trauma is, and even those everyday incremental things that happen with your manager, your coach, someone that you're not even working with, in this toxic culture can cause PTSD in this complex way. Where, without drawing a line, because I don't know if there can be one drawn today, where would you guide people to explore on their own the tools that they have available to them that then you can work with them on? Because you certainly can't prescribe anything, you certainly can't even recommend it, but it's something that someone can come to on their own. Are there tools that you've been able to find that professionals can go to, or is that library not developed yet? Do we need to develop these resources for professionals to go to say, again, setting aside this legal conversation, how does this work? How does it work for me? Because these are all very personalized tools. Right?
Yeah.
These medicines work based on what most people understand as set and setting, the things that your intention is driving. And that's a really challenging thing to work with. Are there places that people can go to learn more about that?
I think it's a gap, to be honest, right? So I think where we find ourselves now, I mean, keep in mind in 2019 when I had those conversations where it was like, oh, you're interested in coaching. Well, if you want to sit with the medicine, you should do that. And you need to communicate about this very cryptically and use signal and never use the word. And people are risking their lives and their livelihood. And the person who told me that, like, it was a year and a half ago, I saw, name on LinkedIn being, celebrated for the research. So it is, I would say that psychedelics are very rapidly becoming much more normalized and accepted, but yet we're still not there. So now, I tell people if they're interested, well, maybe watch on Netflix like How to Change Your Mind, or read the
Mhm.
book by Michael Pollan. Like, understand how these things have existed in societies for a long time. Read about what happened in the 1960s. Like, you've got to start learning and educating yourself. And, I had a client that I was working with, and I saw some people post a Facebook Live about their experience going to a retreat center in Costa Rica. And I knew this client well enough, and the story that was shared, I'm like, you have to listen to this. I think it will really open something up for you. And so this client listened to it, and 2 weeks later, she's in Costa Rica doing ayahuasca. Now, I don't, I don't know that having somebody go to sit with ayahuasca for 3 consecutive nights is the right choice. Like, I think that it would be really nice to have something in between. And that's kind of partly my calling to, like, okay, I want to learn more so that we can put something out there. Like, wouldn't it be nice to pull together a group of professionals that have a very similar background and are trying to work through the same things? I don't talk about this a lot, but one of the things that I've organized through my company, it's called ACA for CPA. Well, ACA is a 12-step group, adult children of alcoholics, and that all work in the CPA profession. Why? Because when you're an adult child of an alcoholic or a dysfunctional family, you have these patterns, ways of thinking and behaving that in ways make you really good in a professional service firm and also are horrible for you. And so we're just this unique tribe of people having a human experience working in a demanding profession that gets a lot. It's very supportive. I mean, I would love nothing more than to, do a psychedelic retreat with other people who are going through similar challenges, because it's very lovely, a lovely container to feel held and to feel understood and to grow from.
Talk to me a little bit about the hard work, which happens after the experience, which goes back to accountability and integration and what that actually means. And because it sounds like in your coaching practice, those two words are really important. You have to integrate something that comes out of your coaching session. If you don't integrate it, you're not going to be able to improve if you're trying to improve. So, how does that work, whether using plant medicine or not, and sort of tying the integration accountability together for people?
Yeah. So I'll just make a quick analogy to therapy, because people are always wondering, well, how is coaching and therapy different? And I think this is a big piece of it. So in therapy, it's like, where am I today and what happened in the past and what's creating sort of these behaviors that are, existing, and feelings and thoughts. And coaching is, where am I today? Where do I want to be in the future? And how do I get a plan for going there? And yeah, absolutely. We're going to maybe look back and go, well, why am I struggling with my boss? Oh, because he reminds me of this, family member. Okay. So now what are you going to do differently? So in coaching, if I'm scoring well, if I'm being evaluated, every single coaching call, I'm going to say to somebody, as a result of our conversation, what's the action that you're going to take? What do you want to be held accountable for? And then when I have the next conversation with the client, it's, what did you do and what did you not do? And what did you learn from it? And really, I believe psychedelics, I really firmly believe this, need that same sort of approach. Because if people, when you do psychedelics, it's going to provide profound insight, right? Whether you're seeing something for your life in the future, whether you're revisiting something in the past and seeing it with new awareness, it provides a lot of insight. But what are you going to do about it? That's the real work. Because if you just go back and do more psychedelics for more insight, for more insight, for more insight, why? You know, insight without action is regret, right? Insight plus action is a new result. And that's the thing. If you really want to change your life, I love Michael Pollan, How to Change Your Mind. Great. But like, if you actually want to change your life, you have to not just change your mind and change your mindset. You have to take action based on that shift in your mind.
I think that's one of the most important things that people fail to realize. You can go out and have an experience. That's nice. It might be this epiphany for you, this aha moment. And whether that's using, any tools like psychedelics or not, it's what happens next. It's what you then do with that moment or that aha or that insight which causes you to take an action, which causes you to improve your life. And that's really the goal. And um, I know for myself and maybe for others, there's this um, blockage, and it's a 4-letter word, and it's a really nasty 4-letter word. It's fear, because we're scared of doing something that we may have not done in the past, or we're not sure if we're going to do in the past, and what are people going to think if we do something. And using plant medicine is one of those things. I mean, I had to overcome that for myself because I grew up in the 80s and I saw my egg frying in a pan, and I didn't want to see that happening to me. But I got past that for a lot of reasons, got past it. But that fear is still so present for people, myself included in a lot of ways. And I've lived a lot of my life out of not fear, and I'm scared of, a zombie coming to bite my arm, not like that, but a fear of, how will people think of me, or how will I show up, and is this the right decision to make, or will I be accountable for my actions if I do this? In your work, where does fear come in, and how do you help people overcome that fear? Because that insight, it's not easy to get to, but it's far easier than taking action. How do you make that transition for people to get to that action, or help them get
Yeah.
to action?
So a few things. I mean, you're right. Fear is it's prominent, right? Like it is the thing that keeps us small in the middle of our comfort zone for sure. And so, step one is helping people to discern the fear. What does your fear sound like? Like, what is the typical things it's telling you, you can or you can't do? What do you already know about it? Because when you have the consciousness around that, like, oh, that's a thought, is that actually a true thought? Like when the pandemic started happening, and I am a consultant to accounting firms, and these firms are like laying people off and saying we're freezing our L&D budgets, like no training. And I'm like, waking up in the middle of the night, how am I going to pay my bills? There's that fear. Amber, you're not, how are you going to pay your bills? Oh, hi, Fear. Like, nice to see you. I've never missed a mortgage payment. I just have a conversation with it. Like, I did miss a rent payment one time. It was busy season. I don't even know what day of the week it was, but like I had the money in the bank. And if I have to do accounting work, if I have to drive an Uber, like I'll do what it takes. Like, I'm not going to go homeless, but I appreciate your concern. Like, we can go back to sleep now. And sometimes it's really that. It's really like noticing I have a fear and then questioning, is that true? Or is there a way that I can learn how to self-soothe? And then how you support others in addition to that is really, I encourage people to think of their comfort zone like when you drop a rock into the water and you see it slowly ripple out. So, if you realize like I'm super burned out and I'm unhappy, the solution is not to immediately quit your job and get a divorce and move to another country and just like, get run away from everything. It's how do I bit by bit expand and get out of my comfort zone, incrementally and incrementally and incrementally in a way that's sustainable for me, that's not going to make it so that I'm totally freaked out and I'm terrified to do these things.
Yeah, it's interesting you use that analogy. I was just reading or listening to something over this weekend. The Grateful Dead song "Ripple" has a line in it that basically, in the song is, trying to help people get somewhere, and it says, "If I knew the way, I would take you there." And what he's saying is, I don't like, it's your path. Like, I don't know how to get you there, because if I did, I would. And I think that's a hard part for people, is it is on us. As much as we may think people can help us get somewhere or guide us to something, which is a nice thing to have, the reality is it's on us. And I think one of the things, I had this in my life when I was going through a divorce, and my sister had been through similar, not a divorce, but traumatic experiences in the past. And she shared a book with me that I thought was a great book at the time. And it's, Face Your Fear and Do It Anyway, which
Mm.
is really that statement of, well, it is just a fear. It's this emotional response to something. It isn't even real. And I think about working with my children now, and they're young kids, and we talk about things they're watching on television, or, if they're having a nightmare, and the what we often say is, but that's make believe. It's not actually real. And once you can get your mind to understand that something's not real, and kind of bring that fear element down a little bit, maybe not entirely, and over time kind of retrain yourself to understand, well, I don't need to be scared of that anymore.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting here you use that word. It really is what it is. And over time too, that ripple dissipates, right? So if it is a fear when it first drops in, it slowly comes back to calm water. And that is definitely a metaphor for life. When so we've talked about this element of accountability. We've talked about vulnerability. You're building your career based on all these conversations and helping others, and you're building teams to do that now. How do you take your personal experience and build a team around you that can amplify your vision now, what your purpose is for the future? How are you doing that?
Um, well, I'm not entering into it knowing or having any idea that I think I'm going to know how it's going to go. And I think that gets back to that last little bit we were talking about and where I see people get stuck. It's like, for those of us who entered public accounting, it's like, okay, here's my job, and I can see every single, step in the ladder to rise and get promoted. And that I don't even think works in modern times anymore. Like every organization needs to think differently in terms of how they scale and grow and meet the needs of the world. And so, my approach has been, who are the people that I want to work with? Who are the people that I enjoy working with, slash I just hold a knowing that they're needed in the world. I actually just last week I spoke with a woman. She's going through coach training, and her husband is a tax partner. And she's just kind of, she's networking and meeting people, which is great. And I was like, you need to coach spouses. Like, you have an amazing lived experience. And how many people talk about being a busy season widow? Like, you could do phenomenal things. And so we're just tossing around this idea, maybe she'll work with me. And she's like, well, you're so helpful to me. How can I help you? And I'm like, you just provide the service. Like, the world needs you. That's how you help me. And so what I'm building isn't to put more money in my bank account. It's not to grow my name. It's really to have a broader impact in the world, and to, I have a range of coaches. I have one coach who technically was above me at PwC, and she does work, and she just does the work. Like, I don't need to mentor her at all. She's rich with experience. But I have some people that are brand new to coaching that I get to mentor, that I get to help develop and grow, and that's a privilege. But I need all of it in my system, because I can't mentor everyone right now. I have, an 8.5-year-old, and I'm committed to not working a lot of hours. Like, I haven't worked over 30 hours in like 5 years. Like, I just don't do that anymore. Um, and I'm just holding on to my values. The margins on the way that I contract people out is not huge. And sometimes I'm like, oh, well, now I understand why partners make so much and staff makes so little. But like, my commitment is to not just preach about what it's like to have a human-centered professional service firm. My commitment is to practice it, and to, have engagements where it's like, okay, here's what I was able to sell it for. How much do you want to make? How do you feel about it? How do I feel about it? Like, these are the kinds of conversations that we're doing it together as we go, and we're learning together as we go. And we're constantly saying, well, how do I feel about that? It's different. it maybe is wild, but like it feels right and true to me.
And it's working.
Yeah.
You're manifesting that. You're bringing people into your world that have these unique lived experiences that can share that with others and help and guide them through what would generally are difficult times. And being a spouse of a tax partner is not easy. Being a spouse of a physician is not easy. And it's not a gender question at all. It's the partner of someone in these very high stress, really dynamic environments brings a lot of that at home, because you transfer a lot of responsibility, knowingly or unknowingly, to that other partner in that relationship, whether it be raising your children, dealing with whatever else is going on in the home, or also working full time, and now both of you being in these stressful environments and then bring that into the home. And so it's really complex, but who better to give that guidance than someone who has lived it and worked through whatever they need to. And in reality, I think we also recognize as humans, we're never going to be perfect. When you think about, and it's always the joke, why does a psychologist need a psychologist? Well, because they too are human. They may have a profession that allows them to help others, but they too are human, and everyone needs that sounding board, that advisor, that guide, no matter how successful they are or how experienced they are. It's the same thing as peer reviews in scientific studies. You need that. You need someone to give you feedback and in many ways hold you accountable. So I think it's great that you're manifesting that and bring people in that can help amplify that. Not because it's necessarily your personal goal and vision, but it's also theirs to help others, and that's a really beautiful thing. What advice can you give to others who are interested in taking a similar path as you, leaving a big organization, branching out on your own, the fear of that, maybe stepping away from being a partner at one of these firms and saying, well, I don't want to work 80 hours a week. I mean, you talk about 30, but I know at times when I was working in these large organizations, I may have put in 100 hours a week. Very unsustainable, but even for the time that I was doing it, very unhealthy. What guidance can you give for someone that is at that point in time in their career, that is trying to figure it out, or not even sure if they're at that point in their career, that needs some impetus to try something new and maybe have the life that you're leading?
Yeah, I think the first thing to do is to find some stillness, some solitude for some inner reflection. And for me, that initially was yoga. I
Mm.
had worked a very unhealthy, busy season and gained a lot of weight. And this friend's like, "You want to go work out?" And I'm like, "Sure, I'll try it." And I say I went to, yoga for my vanity, but what I got was my sanity. And so, whether it's somebody going to yoga, a walk in nature, I used to ride my Peloton a lot, and one of the really popular instructors, her name is Robin Arzon, and she used to be an attorney, and she was like, I would just go to Central Park and walk by myself for 15 minutes, and like, why are you doing that? Because you've got to learn how to stop and check in with you. Some people working in a large organization is great. There were periods in my life where working extra hours or getting my graduate degree, like I'm so grateful that I did those unsustainable, but high achievement times. Like you've got to just stop and go, what's working for me and what's not working, because that is a distinction of the kind of coaching and International Coach Federation. We assume that the client is the expert on their life, and what coaching provides is that place of solitude and stillness for them to look within and go, what do I really need? And what does today's version of me need? Because that's where people get stuck. It's like, well, when I was 20, I had this plan and this is what I was going to do. And it's like they want to hold on to the dreams of when they were 20 years old, and they're like 40 now. And not, like it's okay. We evolve and we change, like our taste buds change, our needs change. It's okay to make different choices, and no one's going to be able to find those answers. Back to the Grateful Dead, like your unique path is your unique path. The work of the coach is to create the container to get you to open up and hold you accountable for the change you desire. But ultimately that wisdom exists inside of you.
Yeah, and it's also not someone else's timeline, it's yours. And everyone has a different time that they're going to achieve something or not, but it's their own timeline. It's not, well, someone else did this in 2 years, so you have to do it in 2 years. It may take that person 10, and that's perfectly fine. You may not, become a partner until you're 60. Now, obviously, they won't let you in a partnership at that age because you got to retire and then pay them out. But there are these timelines that people set, sometimes realistic and sometimes unrealistic in life, that I think that's a big challenge for people. Is we have these expectations. I do this to myself all the time. And when they're not achieved and when certain things can't happen, you then say, well, I'm a failure, or why can I not do something that someone else can do? But it sounds like the roadmap for that in what you're saying is find that place of solitude, so you can understand what is happening maybe in your life, or that point of practice. You talk about yoga, and yoga is more than just a movement; it's a practice, and you found your sanity in that. It sounds like that is a key to unlocking your potential, unlocking your future. Um, with that said, where are you going next? What is the future? I mean, we can talk about the past, and I know you've reflected on that. You've talked about using plant medicine, so that is the sort of infinite opening to your past, but also it's this, I would say, opening to your future. So where are you going with conscious and everything you're doing professionally as a coach?
Yeah, so I've recently had a lot of crystallization about this. Like, I've been in a place of knowing some things were going to happen, but not maybe knowing the timeline. And I love that you mentioned timeline, because that is something that's been so powerful with my team, by the way, is us sharing like where we're at. And in the past year, I've spent a lot of time helping family members, which has been an absolute gift. I happen to have like I mentioned, an 81-year-old dad, and on my mom's side, an 88-year-old grandfather. And nothing brings me more joy than knowing that I'm there to help them right now. Well, my daughter brings me a lot of joy. It's a bold statement, but helping them right now, because they've been instrumental in my life at different periods, is profound. And so where I was thinking to my team, one of my teammates is like, I really feel this calling to help my elderly parents in another country, and I don't know what that means. I was like, you don't have to know. All you need to do is tell me when you want to work, and that's safe. You can be that here. And I want to even support you even more with that, because that's what I've been doing. So, part of it is continuing to grow, for me, growing a team in that way, that knowing that the more I nurture them and their journeys, whatever is going on with their journeys, whether they want their foot on the gas pedal or they want to pull it back, that I'm here to support that. And in my magical way, I don't grind for business development. I say, okay, universe, I'm ready for another project. And I draw in the right clients. So that is a piece of it. The other piece is I'm going to be going for the highest designation of my coaching credential. There is this, I used to be so ego driven, and I got the minimum hours of requirements years ago, and I haven't done it yet. But it feels like the time is to do it now, because it dovetails into the next thing, is really professionalizing psychedelic coaching. Coaching is a younger profession. It's still the wild, wild west. I get linked at in, cold calls from coaches all the time. I'm like, you're not even a coach, get away, scram. And for the reasons I mentioned earlier, I just think it's going to be so important to, when there's psychedelic coaches or integration coaches, to have some standardization, some code of ethics, some real, education there. And I've got this book that needs to get out in the world, which is part memoir, part self-help, of like helping other people that maybe came from these childhoods that weren't healthy, and they don't even realize how they've impacted them. So by me telling my story, I'm hoping people see their story and they learn that they have the power to create a wonderful and beautiful life. Yeah. And on a personal note, just continue to raise my daughter and learn and grow and live in a house again with a man. Had been in a relationship for 3.5 years, and I'm like, oh God, this is hard. All my old stuff's coming up, but I want to learn. I want to grow. And he's a lovely human being. He's really wonderful. But those are the things that I'm most inspired about.
And now you have not all of the tools, but many of the tools to make all these things happen and take the action that you need to. Well, I'm excited to hear about all those things, and certainly excited to read the book when it comes out and have you back on the show when it does come out. We can talk about everything in the book. I'm sure it has a lot of really interesting stories and experiences and tools for people to process. So where can people find you? If someone's interested in working with you or finding help as a coach, where do they go?
Yeah, so if you go to our website, it's conscious.cpa. We are geared towards accountants because that's where I came from and grew up, so to speak. But really, we can help all sorts of professionals, and really are quite helpful with busy professionals, people that maybe are very well trained in intellect, but haven't been trained in the people side of the business. It's really a sweet spot. I'm also on LinkedIn, usually saying something. Really enjoy being active there and just sharing what I'm up to in the world. So, and I like to be helpful. If anyone wants to, something about today was interesting to you, you're curious about coaching, you're curious about plant medicine, you're curious about how do we build a more humane corporate America. Those are the conversations that I'm interested in, because I think that, we've gone through a real dark night of the soul. We're realizing that the way that we've been working and living does not work anymore. And we don't know how to solve the problems. But it's these conversations, these curious and connected conversations that will help us to solve the modern day challenges.
Well, I appreciate all the work that you're doing. Are there any last words? I mean, those are pretty powerful statements. Anything else you'd want to share with our audience?
Follow your own heart. Yeah.
Follow your own heart. Well, simple, but yet very difficult to do. And I'm sure people will need the guidance of a trained professional such as yourself and other team members that you have. And I think you've helped to break down a lot of those barriers for people today in understanding where they are, trying to find where they are, and trying to find the guidance and support they need to move forward in their lives. So that is a great way to end it. So Amber, thank you for your time today. I'm excited to have future conversations with you about the book, about what you're working on in coaching and professional coaching and coaching with psychedelics. Clearly, there's a new frontier to be explored. So thank you again, and we'd welcome you back anytime, and appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Adeptus On-Air. If you like this episode, please subscribe and leave a review. If you have a question related to this episode or have a request for what you would like to hear, please email us at marketing@adeptuscpas.com. You can also find us at adeptuscpas.com online or follow us at Adeptus on social media. The views and opinions by the podcast speakers and guests are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of Adeptus. This podcast provides general information only and is not intended to constitute advice.